The Dravidian language family comprises at least 24 languages spoken by roughly 250 million people across South Asia, the vast majority in southern and central India. This family includes major literary tongues like Tamil, Telugu and Malayalam, alongside a host of smaller but equally fascinating languages. However, the deeper history of the Dravidian languages remains shrouded in mystery and intense speculation. Over the decades, researchers have tried to link them to everything from broad linguistic families across northern and eastern Eurasia to the ancient language isolate Elamite. Some have even proposed that a form of Dravidian was the primary tongue of the Bronze Age Indus Valley civilization. Yet despite over a century of theories, there is still very little consensus in the literature. So today we're going to try and get a little bit closer to those earliest Dravidians, and to do that we'll turn to Proto-Dravidian, the reconstructed ancestor of all modern Dravidian languages. We'll explore what this linguistic blueprint can actually tell us about the people who spoke it, the lives they led, and how we might finally be able to connect the dots and build an accurate and vibrant history of the Dravidians. The first question we might want to ask ourselves is, where can we find the native Dravidian homeland? And here we stumble into an issue, because in the academic literature we find a variety of proposed ancestral homelands. The more serious proposals tend to range from the southern half of the Indian subcontinent all the way to the South Caspian region. Alongside these, however, there are also a number of more fringe ideas that scatter the Dravidian homeland across much of Eurasia. The key point is this: no single proposal has reached anything like a scholarly consensus. Instead, what we do know is that Dravidian-speaking communities were already present in northwest India by the time the Indo-Aryans entered the subcontinent in the mid-2nd millennium BCE. We know this from the presence of Dravidian loanwords embedded in the earliest layers of the Rig Veda, the oldest of the 4 sacred Sanskrit texts of Hinduism. But before that contact, the story is much less certain. In terms of the Dravidian languages nowadays, however, we of course have a clearer picture. The majority of the Dravidian languages are concentrated in southern and central India, with a significant number of diaspora speakers around the world. The Dravidian language family is typically divided into 4 main subgroups. South Dravidian includes major languages such as Tamil, Kannada and Malayalam. South Central Dravidian is represented by languages like Telugu and Gondi. Central Dravidian includes smaller languages such as Kolami and Parji. Finally, we have North Dravidian, which consists of languages like Brahui and Kurukh. Only 4 Dravidian languages have long, well-documented written traditions. The earliest known inscriptions in Tamil appear in the 3rd century BCE, although some researchers have argued for earlier dates, possibly as early as the 5th or 6th century BCE. In Kannada, inscriptions appear in the 5th century CE, in Telugu in the 6th century, and in Malayalam in the 9th century. In each case, sustained literary activity follows roughly 1 or 2 centuries later. As is so often the case when discussing language families, the exact branching structure of the Dravidian language family tree remains somewhat debated in the literature. However, I'll put a classic representation of the family up on screen now. The lower level branches are relatively uncontroversial. It's the higher level arrangement that remains unclear. For example, it has long been assumed in the literature that North Dravidian is the most divergent branch, and therefore the first to split from Core Dravidian. However, a 2018 phylogenetic analysis suggests that a different scenario may be more likely, with South Dravidian, so the branch containing languages such as Tamil and Malayalam, branching off first. The same paper dates Proto-Dravidian to around 2,500 years BCE, which agrees with several other mainstream estimates, although some do date it earlier. The same paper in fact also suggests that Proto-Dravidian may be older than the 2,500 year BC estimate, although with lower probability. Proto-Dravidian is a linguistic model that represents the last unified stage of the Dravidian language family before it split into its daughter branches. It therefore should encapsulate what is considered to be the essence of Dravidian, in its earliest reconstructible form. But as always, it's important to remember Proto-Dravidian is a linguistic model. It's our best attempt at reconstruction, and as with all proto-languages, its structure and content will change and evolve as research progresses. Proto-Dravidian's reconstruction is achieved primarily through the comparative method, which is a systematic analysis of Dravidian languages, and it allows us to identify regular sound correspondences, shared morphological patterns, and subsequently the reconstruction of the common ancestor. Crucially though, any effective reconstruction of any proto-language must always be grounded in internal data, so in this case in Dravidian forms themselves. External influences must be carefully controlled for, particularly from neighbouring language families such as Indo-Aryan, Sino-Tibetan and Austroasiatic, as well as from earlier Paleo-substrate languages in the region. In Proto-Dravidian, 5 vowel qualities are reconstructible, each occurring in both a short and long variant. Diphthongs are generally not reconstructed at the proto level. In terms of consonants, Proto-Dravidian is usually reconstructed with around 16 or 17 values, as you can see on screen. One of the main points of contention among linguists is whether this phoneme existed at the proto stage. It has been proposed to account for certain phonological inconsistencies between the daughter branches, but its reconstruction does remain debated. It is also important to remain aware that this is not the direct ancestor of this value as it appears in many modern Dravidian languages. Interestingly, voicing was not phonemic in Proto-Dravidian. Whether a consonant was voiced or voiceless actually just depended on its phonological environment, and its presence or absence did not distinguish between different phonemes at the proto level. Turning now to morphology, Proto-Dravidian is typically described as agglutinating and exclusively suffixal. A typical root has the following structure. Proto-Dravidian appears to have had just 2 primary parts of speech, the noun and the verb. Attempts have been made to reconstruct a class of adjectives, but these remain highly debated. Many proposed Proto-Dravidian adjectives turn out, upon closer inspection, to behave more like defective nouns or verbs. This is reinforced by the fact that none of the candidates show comparative or superlative marking. That being said, I must point out that some researchers do reconstruct at least a limited set of adjectives at the proto-language level. Proto-Dravidian likely also lacked clearly distinct classes of adverbs, conjunctions and articles, relying instead on verbs, nominal forms and syntactic strategies to do much of the heavy lifting. Proto-Dravidian has at least 4 uncontroversially reconstructed cases: the nominative, accusative, dative and genitive, as you can see on screen. The nominative was 0 marked, and other case markers may have existed at the proto level, but their form and exact function are unclear from the comparative evidence. Postpositions were also likely used to express nuanced case-like functions, which later developed into full case suffixes in some of the daughter languages. Proto-Dravidian had 2 numbers, singular and plural. The use of the plural marker seems to be optional for non-humans. both can be reconstructed at the proto level, please see on screen now. Gender in Proto-Dravidian distinguished between animate and inanimate nouns. Animate nouns are often further divided into masculine and feminine in the daughter languages, though it remains unclear whether and to what extent such a division can be reconstructed for the proto-language. Moving on to pronouns now, the Proto-Dravidian reconstructed pronoun system is on screen, and we can see the nominative and oblique forms. In Dravidian, oblique forms are special stem forms used with any case that isn't the nominative. In the reconstructed pronoun system, we see that these oblique forms are usually derived from the nominative through vowel shortening. However, in other cases, special suffixes are added to prepare the noun stem to receive further case endings. These elements go by various names in the literature. I'll simply refer to them as the oblique augment. It's important to note that they don't carry any real semantic content, they're purely structural. Krishnamurti in 2003 presented an interesting analysis that basically all Dravidian oblique augments could be formed by various combinations of the following. There is an example from Telugu on screen. Please check out Krishnamurti's work for a full analysis. Negation is an interesting aspect of the Dravidian languages. Of course, with no concrete class of adverbs, the responsibility for signalling negation falls on the verb. Dravidian daughter languages employ a number of strategies of negation, including negative verbs, affixes, and even something known as the Dravidian zero negative, where some languages express negation simply by removing the tense marker. Some researchers have suggested this strategy developed out of a polite way to say no. At the Proto-Dravidian level, it is likely that negation was primarily expressed through dedicated negative verb forms, with systems in daughter languages evolving from this or through the incorporation of external arreal features. An inflected noun in Proto-Dravidian carries the following structure. And here is the verb complex. Now, of course, phonology and morphology are all well and good, but how about we take a look at some of the lexicon of Proto-Dravidian? There are two key resources if you would like to investigate this further. The first is the Dravidian Etymological Dictionary, first published in 1961 and later revised, which contains thousands of comparative Dravidian etymologies. However, it does not present a systematic list of Proto-Dravidian reconstructions. For explicit reconstructed forms, you'll want the Dravidian Languages, published in 2003 as part of the Cambridge Language Surveys series. Towards the back of the book we have the Proto-Dravidian reconstructions. Here we can see a table of correspondences between a selection of words in the Dravidian languages. This table is based on a similar table from Steever 2020. I've added the Proto-Dravidian forms and it's designed to show you some of the parallels and divergences within the Dravidian languages. By analysing the Proto-Dravidian lexicon, we get a picture of a highly developed society living in settled communities, probably in towns with tiled or terrace houses where agriculture was central. The Proto-Dravidians seem to have managed water through wells, tanks and lakes and had knowledge of drainage, and even carried out trade by boat. We'll come back later to the Proto-Dravidian vocabulary inventory, as it might be able to provide us with some tantalising suggestions to as of the deeper origins of the Dravidians. So far we've been looking at what we can reconstruct with a reasonable degree of confidence: phonology, morphology and parts of the lexicon. But naturally the next question is, can we go any further? Can Proto-Dravidian itself be connected to anything beyond the Dravidian family? Over the years, a number of proposals have been put forward. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, a variety of researchers saw parallels between the Dravidian languages and the so-called Ural-Altaic languages. Now, I've done 2 recent videos on Altaic. Go and check those out if you haven't. But in its broadest form, Altaic has been taken to include the Turkic, Mongolic, Tungusic, Koreanic and Japonic languages. To this grouping, in its early days, often the Uralic languages were also added as a distant relative. The typological and structural similarities between Uralic and Altaic languages, particularly their agglutinative morphology, suffixing structure and subject-object-verb word order, were the main reasons linguists began to explore potential connections across this very wide grouping, and it was for exactly the same reason that Dravidian was later brought into the discussion. The problem is that these large-scale proposals, Ural-Altaic and by extension those including Dravidian, began really to struggle under closer scrutiny. At the time many of these connections were being proposed, full and robust reconstructions of the proto-languages were not yet available. And as these reconstructions improved, it became increasingly difficult to demonstrate anything more than superficial linguistic similarities across such a large and diverse group of languages. So today the idea of a unified Ural-Altaic family has largely fallen out of favour. Many specialists instead focus on establishing solid internal reconstructions, Uralicis within Uralic and Altaicis within their own respective branches. The bulk of linguists today interpret the similarities between the Ural-Altaic languages as the result of long-term areal contact rather than a shared origin, and Dravidian's proposed connection to them has been more or less abandoned since the proto-languages began to be compared in a more systematic and meaningful way instead of focusing on broad structural similarities. So while some proposals tried to link Dravidian to massive language groupings stretching across Eurasia, others took a very different approach, looking instead for narrower connections somewhat closer to home. The most well-known of these is the proposed link with Elamite. Elamite was an ancient language spoken in what is now southwestern Iran. Unlike many of the families we've just discussed, it is generally treated as a language isolate, standing entirely alone with no proven relatives. Its status as a language isolate, therefore, has made it an attractive candidate for comparison with Dravidian and many other language families from fairly early on. Unlike many language isolates, Elamite has been pulled into a dizzying array of conflicting proposals, each trying to find it a home, so to speak. Now, it might not seem obvious to look for a connection between South India and southwestern Iran, but Dravidian languages do exist well outside their core area, as we can see here on screen, most notably Brahui in present-day Pakistan. This has led some researchers to suggest that Dravidian may once have had a wider geographic distribution, or that it spread into southern India from somewhere further in the north. Others have linked this idea more tentatively to archaeological models of interaction between the Iranian plateau and the Indus region, though this does remain debated. The idea of an Elamo-Dravidian connection dates back to the mid-19th century, but the first modern comparative analysis was conducted by David McAlpin, who proposed a common ancestor he called Proto-Elamo-Dravidian. In some later versions of this theory, often referred to as the Zagrossian framework, the idea is pushed even further. In this model, Dravidian is treated as one branch of a larger family, while Elamite and even Brahui are placed on another. This effectively removes Brahui from the Dravidian family as it is usually understood. However, this remains a minority view and has not gained wide acceptance. At first glance, the parallels are tempting. Both Elamite and Dravidian are verb final, they rely heavily on suffixes, use postpositions, But as we've seen, these are common typological features. They are not, on their own, evidence of a genetic relationship. However, when we look at the lexicon of Proto-Dravidian, we see some interesting patterns that might delicately hint at a westerly Dravidian origin. There is a reasonably well developed set of terms for general agricultural activities, such as ploughing, reaping and threshing, as well as words for fields. Additionally, the vocabulary for domesticated animals, particularly cattle, calves, goats and sheep, is comparatively rich. Taken together, this has led some scholars, such as David McAlpin, to suggest a society in which herding played a central role, aligning therefore more closely with a West Asian herding complex than later South Asian rice-based systems. Though it should be noted that some scholars have proposed a Proto-Dravidian term for rice, but this also remains debated. When we take a look at the list of potential cognates between Elamite and Dravidian, the number of convincing forms is rather small. In McAlpin's 1982 work, 81 proposed cognate forms are identified out of an Elamite corpus of around 5,000 lexical items, so that's not exactly a large number. It would be wrong to say that the Alamo-Dravidian hypothesis has been completely dismissed. Researcher Sanford Steever notes that Dravidian studies have developed significantly since the earliest comparative analyses with Elamite. New data on certain northern and central Dravidian languages were not available at the time of some of the earliest attempts to link Dravidian with an external language family. This, combined with more recent research on Elamite, creates new opportunities for researchers attempting to answer the age-old question of Dravidian language relatedness. Therefore, while many specialists remain sceptical, others argued that the question should remain open, and here I happen to agree. Probably one of the most tantalising ideas in the academic literature on Dravidian is the attempt to link it to the enigmatic Indus Valley civilization. The Indus Valley civilization emerged in the 3rd millennium BCE as one of the world's earliest urban societies, centred on the fertile Indus River system and its tributaries. It covered a vast area across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, exceeding the scale of its contemporaries in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Its position at the crossroads of major land and sea routes enabled long-distance trade with the Near East, Central Asia and beyond, while its agricultural base supported large, stable populations. The civilization developed in a rich but often unstable environment, shaped by powerful rivers, seasonal flooding and tectonic activity. Its major cities reveal advanced urban planning, including grid-based layouts, sophisticated drainage systems and well-constructed houses with access to water. Standardised systems of weights and measurements further point to a high degree of organisation and control over trade and economic life. Despite these achievements, much about the civilization remains unknown. Its script, found on seals and other objects, has never been deciphered, despite numerous attempts and claims otherwise. Even the underlying language it represents remains uncertain. There are, however, some tentative clues that have led scholars to explore a possible Dravidian connection. For example, Asko Parpala has argued that the sign for fish in the Indus script may have also represented star. He notes that in Proto-Dravidian the words for fish and star are the same. Intriguing, but hardly proof of any linguistic relatedness. Another proposed correspondence is that the Indus civilization appears to have used both base 8 and base 10 counting systems. Parpala again points out that in Dravidian languages, the word for 8 is related to the verb to count. This probably means that they counted just using their fingers instead of thumbs, and when they reached 8, the counting procedure reset. It's worth checking out Parpala's work because he does give some other interesting parallels between the Dravidian languages and the Indus Valley civilization. However, much is speculative and debated. Other researchers have attempted to analyse the Indus script and have reached a variety of conclusions, some of which do seem to point toward a Dravidian solution. However, there is still no consensus, and competing theories link the script to entirely different language families. But it is also important to remember that the Indus Valley civilization may not have been linguistically uniform. Multiple languages may have been spoken, and their distribution may have shifted over time. With all of these proposed relationships to Ural-Altaic, Elamite and the Indus Valley, a primary issue links all of them. Proto-Dravidian, the reconstructed ancestral language of the Dravidian family that we've been discussing today, is still very much a work in progress. As research continues and we gain a more detailed understanding of Dravidian, we may eventually be able to better evaluate these long-distance connections. But for now, we simply can't say for sure. What we can say is that the Dravidian language family represents a truly fascinating group of languages. It's been a real pleasure exploring this family over the past few months in preparation for producing this video. I've even started taking some Malayalam classes. That's honestly how engaged I've become. And I'm excited to see how Dravidian studies will develop in the coming years. Definitely some exciting times. I'd like to say thank you to those I consulted over the past few weeks regarding my many questions on historical Dravidian linguistics. I hope I've managed to present a balanced synthesis of Proto-Dravidian. Do check out the source materials though, you can find them in the video and in the description below. If you enjoyed this, please give me a like, subscribe, maybe buy me a coffee, and most importantly, let me know in the comments where you'd like this proto-language series to go next. You've been fantastic as always. Goodbye for now.